The Patriots are heading into their final preseason game against the Cleveland Browns, and this game is about much more than simply finishing the preseason, with the roster currently sitting at 90 players, and the deadline to cut that number down to 53 coming on Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Every snap could matter for the players still fighting to stay in New England. The result of the game is not the priority here. The real story is evaluation, competition, and figuring out which players have done enough to earn a place on the final roster. One of the biggest questions is whether the Patriots will finally put some of their starters on the field. Drake May and the other key players have not taken a preseason snap so far, and there is still uncertainty about whether that changes against Cleveland. The situation is understandable because New England did not have a joint practice with the Browns this week, unlike the previous weeks with Philadelphia and Indianapolis. There is also a much bigger concern behind the decision. The Patriots simply do not have tremendous depth at several positions, meaning an injury to an important player could create a serious problem before the regular season even begins. That decision does create one interesting concern for the regular season though. If the starters continue to sit, there is a possibility that the offense could enter week 1 without having played together in an actual preseason game. For the quarterback in particular, the question is whether the lack of game action could lead to some rust when the Patriots finally face Seattle. The source points to the concern that quarterbacks who do not play during the preseason can sometimes need time to regain their normal rhythm once meaningful games begin. So while protecting the starters makes sense, there is still a legitimate question about how prepared they will feel when the regular season arrives. And that is why this Cleveland game could be much more important for the players behind the starters. One of the most interesting battles is at quarterback, where the Patriots have a competition developing for the backup and emergency roles. Tommy DeVito has looked solid, but Baron Morton has also put together a performance that makes this decision much less obvious than it might have been earlier in the preseason. Both quarterbacks have shown enough to remain part of the conversation, and the final game could give the coaching staff one last opportunity to decide how the depth chart should look. The numbers make that competition even more interesting. Morton has completed 20 of 30 passes, while DeVito has completed 21 of 37. Both have thrown a touchdown, and neither has committed a turnover according to the information provided. The expectation is that both could receive significant playing time, potentially splitting the game, with DeVito getting the first half and Morton taking the second. That means this is not simply about who looks better on paper. It is about who can take advantage of the final opportunity and make the strongest impression before the roster decisions are made. Then there is another battle that could come down to the final night: running back. The competition for the third running back position has become extremely difficult to predict, with multiple players involved and injuries potentially changing the equation. Hassan Haskins has become an important name in this situation after joining the Patriots following Terrell Jennings' injury. His biggest advantage is not necessarily what he has produced offensively, but his experience and ability on special teams, which could give him an edge over some of the other candidates. The health situation makes that competition even more important. Jam Miller appeared to have a possible issue during practice and spent time on the sideline, while Lan Larison was also dealing with a limitation. If either player is unable to participate fully against Cleveland, the opportunity for Haskins becomes even bigger. A strong performance could change the entire conversation surrounding the third running back spot. This is exactly the type of situation where one player can enter the final preseason game as a contender and leave it having made a legitimate case for the 53-man roster. The rookies are another major part of this final evaluation. Some of the younger players are already viewed as being in a strong position to make the team, meaning the coaching staff can use this game to give them valuable reps before the regular season. Caleb Lomu and Gabe Eyes are among those expected to receive work, especially because the coaching staff believes additional playing time can help their development. ASEs in particular has missed significant time during the offseason because of injuries and his contract situation, making these final preseason snaps even more valuable. But not every rookie is simply preparing for week 1. For players such as Karan Prunty and Nami Obisor, the situation is much more urgent. They are fighting for roster spots, and that means they may have to play a much larger portion of the game. Prunty's situation is especially interesting because the final decision could depend on whether New England keeps 5 or 6 cornerbacks. If the Patriots decide to keep 6, his path becomes much clearer. If they keep only 5, however, there is a serious numbers battle involving the remaining candidates. A standout performance against Cleveland could be exactly what changes that decision. The linebacker position may be one of the biggest areas of concern heading into the game. The Patriots do not have a lot of depth there, and the situation becomes even more important because some players have been dealing with injuries while others have struggled to establish themselves. Chad Muma, for example, is described in the source as falling behind after a poor performance against Philadelphia, while Obisor has given the team another player to evaluate in the final preseason game. That could put a lot of pressure on the coaching staff to determine whether the current group is enough. If the young players cannot show that they are capable of handling a role in the rotation, New England may have to consider bringing in another linebacker. That makes this final game more than just another preseason appearance. It could help answer whether the Patriots believe they already have the depth they need, or whether another move may be necessary before the regular season begins. And finally, there is a special teams situation that could quietly become one of the most important storylines of the entire night. Bryce Behringer suffered an injury in the preseason game against Philadelphia, and the Patriots responded by bringing in Matt Hack. Hack has experience in the NFL and had a strong statistical line in his limited action last season, including an average of 50 yards per punt, no touchbacks, and 10 punts placed inside the 20 over 25 punts. But his challenge is not simply punting the football well, he also has to handle the holding duties for field goals, which makes his performance especially important. The Patriots already experienced a problem with a new long snapper against Indianapolis, so the operation between the snap, hold, and kick is something worth watching closely. Hack essentially has one major opportunity to show the team that he can handle the job while Behringer is unavailable. If he performs well, he could remain the team's punter during that absence. If he struggles, the Patriots could look elsewhere. So as we get to this final preseason game, Patriots fans should not be watching the scoreboard nearly as much as they watch the individual battles. The quarterback competition, the fight for the third running back spot, the cornerback numbers, the linebacker depth, and the punting situation could all influence what this roster looks like when the 53-man deadline arrives. For some players, this is the final chance to make the coaching staff believe they belong in New England. And for the Patriots, it is one last opportunity to gather information before the preseason is over and the real season begins. With so many roster decisions still hanging in the balance, the question is simple. Which position battle do you think will have the biggest impact on the Patriots' final 53-man roster? And that is what makes this final preseason game so important for the Patriots, because the decisions are becoming much clearer, but there are still enough questions to make this one of the most interesting nights of the entire preseason. The quarterback situation is probably the easiest place to start, because this is one of the battles where the Patriots already have a pretty good idea of what they want, but there is still a chance for the final game to change the order. Tommy DeVito has looked solid throughout the preseason, but Baron Morton has made this decision much more competitive than it appeared before. The important thing here is that neither player has given the coaching staff a reason to simply dismiss him. Both have thrown a touchdown, neither has turned the ball over, and both have shown enough to remain serious candidates for the final quarterback roles. That means every possession matters. If DeVito comes out and controls the offense, makes good decisions, and avoids mistakes, he can strengthen his case to remain the backup. But if Morton takes his opportunities and produces the kind of performance that forces the coaching staff to reconsider the order, suddenly we could have a much more interesting decision. The expectation from the information in the source is that DeVito could receive the first half while Morton gets the second half, giving both quarterbacks a significant opportunity to make their final argument. And remember, this isn't about winning the game. The Patriots could win, lose, or finish the night with a completely different score than expected, and none of that will determine who makes the roster. For the players on the bubble, the real scoreboard is the evaluation being made by the coaching staff. Can you execute? Can you protect the football? Can you handle your responsibilities? Can you show that you can be trusted when the regular season arrives? Those are the questions that matter much more than the final score. The running back competition is another situation where one performance could completely change the conversation. Hassan Haskins has an opportunity because of the injuries affecting the other candidates, and his special teams experience gives him something valuable that some of the other players do not have. In a roster battle this close, being useful in more than one phase of the game can become extremely important. A player who can contribute on offense and special teams gives the coaching staff another reason to keep him around. That does not mean the job is already his. The information in the source makes it clear that the competition is still open. Jam Miller and Lan Larison remain part of the conversation, and their availability for the final game could have a major impact on what happens. If they are healthy enough to play, they have another opportunity to show why they deserve the spot. If they cannot play, however, the opportunity becomes much larger for Haskins and JaMychal Hasty. This is exactly the type of roster battle that can become unpredictable in the final preseason game. A player can spend most of camp fighting for attention, then suddenly receive a large number of snaps because someone ahead of him is unavailable. One good game can change the perception of that player, one bad game can do the opposite. That is why the running back position deserves so much attention when the Patriots take the field against Cleveland. The same thing is happening with the young players on defense. Some of the rookies are not simply trying to prepare for the regular season. They are trying to convince the Patriots that they should still be wearing the uniform when the roster is reduced to 53 players. Karan Prunty and Nami Obisor are particularly important examples because their situations remain connected to the numbers game at their positions. For Prunty, the question is not just whether he can play, it is also about how many cornerbacks the Patriots decide to keep. If New England keeps 6, his path becomes much more favorable. If the team keeps 5, then the competition becomes much more difficult because other players are also fighting for those limited spots. That means his